They thought he was just an easy target, a quiet man, alone in a dusty diner, the perfect mark. But when the bikers pushed too far, they quickly learned some battles are over before they even begin. The wind carried a bite that afternoon as Darius's truck crunched into the gravel parking lot of Earl's Diner, a worn-out roadside stop tucked just off Route 66. The kind of place where the clock seemed to freeze and strangers weren't always met with warmth. The neon open sign buzzed faintly against the dusty glass, flickering with just enough life to announce the diner was still alive. Nearby, a lone gas station stood, its pumps rusted, forgotten relics of a past era. Darius killed the engine, his eyes flicking toward the diner as he adjusted his baseball cap and grabbed his wallet. Inside, the diner matched his expectations, checkered floors, vinyl booths fraying at the edges, and a jukebox languishing in the corner, silent for decades. The air reeked of burnt coffee and greasy remnants, like a bad memory that lingered longer than it should. A waitress with tired eyes wiped down a counter that didn't need it, mumbling something to the short-order cook behind her. The bell above the door rang, its jarring sound drawing eyes. But not smiles, just stares, heavy, unspoken, eyes that lingered a beat too long. At a corner booth sat a group of bikers, leather vests and dark sunglasses, their laughter falling silent the moment Darius entered. He didn't flinch, didn't change his pace. With relaxed shoulders, he headed for a booth by the window. Old habits died hard, he preferred to face the exits. The waitress approached, her pen tapping nervously against her notepad. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat, a little worn. "A cheeseburger and fries, and coffee, black," Darius answered softly. She scribbled it down, not meeting his eyes, her gaze flicking toward the bikers, now watching him intently, hawk-like, waiting. Darius didn't react. He sat, calm and still, tracing the rim of his coffee cup, pretending the room wasn't growing louder. One of the bikers, a broad man with a thick beard and black ink tattoos across his knuckles, leaned back in his chair and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Well, would you look at that? Seems we got ourselves a tourist." Laughter followed, low and guttural. Darius didn't engage, didn't look up. The man wasn't done, though. "Hey, buddy, you deaf or just rude?" As the waitress returned with the coffee, her hands slightly trembling, Darius offered her a faint smile and murmured a soft thank you. It wasn't her fight, she didn't need to feel guilty for walking away. And she did, fast. Darius took a sip of his coffee. He didn't need to look up to know they were all watching him now. The room had chosen sides. Outside, a truck rumbled by, the gravel crunching under its tires. But inside, the silence thickened, heavy with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. The biker's eyes were locked on him, waiting for a reaction he wasn't about to give. "Maybe he's just shy," the bearded man jeered, his lips curling into a smug grin. "Or maybe he's lost. Ain't much for his kind out here." That did it. A cruel, low laugh rolled through the group like a wave against rocks. The diner, not large to begin with, felt suffocating now, each breath harder to take than the last. Darius didn't flinch. Another slow sip of coffee. He didn't even twitch. If anything, he looked bored. The scrape of a chair echoed through the room as the bearded man pushed away from the table, boots thudding across the floor as he swaggered forward, his presence like a storm cloud gathering. The others leaned back, eager for the show. The waitress stood frozen behind the counter, eyes darting between Darius and the advancing biker. The man stopped beside Darius's booth, close enough that his leather vest reeked of sweat and cheap cigarettes. "Hey, I'm talking to you, boy," he growled. The words hit the air like a slap, sharp, cruel, deliberate. Darius didn't move. He didn't look up. Instead, he set his coffee down, slow and measured. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, his voice even. Polite, but with something behind it. It wasn't combative. In fact, it was almost polite. But the way he said it, soft, deliberate, gave the biker pause. Beardman's eyes narrowed. "You're sitting where you don't belong. Don't you know how things work around here?" Behind him, one of the other bikers, a wiry man with stringy hair, snickered. "Show him, Travis. Teach him some manners." Darius exhaled quietly, a breath barely noticeable, but it was there. "I'm just here for lunch," he said, his voice calm, steady. A statement, not a challenge. The calmness in his voice set Travis off. He wanted a reaction. Something to justify what was coming next. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the salt shaker. "I don't think you heard me, friend." Darius's gaze lifted slowly, locking with Travis's. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't aggression in Darius's eyes. No, there was no fear either. What Travis saw was stillness. The kind that doesn't break, doesn't budge. It unsettled him. But he didn't show it. A beat passed. "Back off," Darius said quietly. Not a plea. Not a threat. Just a fact. Travis snorted, his discomfort hidden behind bravado. Or what? The diner went dead silent. Not a soul moved. Even the cook had stopped flipping burgers. Travis's patience snapped. "You're going to learn some respect today." He reached out to grab Darius by the collar. But Darius's hand was already moving, quick as a snake, catching Travis's wrist midair, his grip unbreakable. The biker froze, startled. "Don't," Darius said softly, his voice calm but carrying an edge. For a moment, Travis didn't know what to do. The other bikers were watching, silently urging him to act. With a jerk, Travis pulled his arm free and stumbled back a step, snarling to save face. "Think you're tough, huh?" he spat, flexing his hand. "We'll see about that." He turned to the others, shouting, "Get up, boys!" Chairs scraped as the other 5 bikers stood, cracking their knuckles, rolling their shoulders. Darius stayed seated, watching them, no fear in his eyes, no anger. Just a calm stillness that seemed impossible. The waitress, trembling, grabbed the phone behind the counter. "Don't," she started, but Travis cut her off with a glare. "Put it down," he barked. She shrank back, helpless. Travis turned back to Darius. "You've got 2 choices, pal. Walk out that door right now, or we take this outside." Darius didn't move. He didn't blink. Instead, he set his coffee cup down, the sound nearly inaudible. "I'd rather finish my lunch," he said simply. Travis grinned, like he'd won something. "Fine. We'll do it here, then." The bikers moved in closer, forming a half-circle around the booth. They thought they had him trapped. Thought the numbers mattered. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The diner became a stage. Every customer an unwilling audience. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the clinking of utensils had stopped. The bikers loomed, shadows stretching across Darius like threats. Travis, eager to reclaim his pride, cracked his knuckles and smirked. "Last chance, tough guy. Walk out now before we put you down." Darius stared at him, unblinking. No shift in his posture. No tension in his muscles. He looked almost bored. And that made Travis furious. "You just don't get it," Travis spat. And without warning, he lunged. The moment moved in slow motion for everyone else, but for Darius, it was instinct. Like breathing. Darius moved, not a flinch, not a shuffle, but a precise, practiced motion. He slid out of the booth, grabbed Travis's wrist mid-swing, redirecting his force. The biker stumbled forward, caught off guard. Before he could react, Darius twisted his arm behind his back, guiding him straight into the table. A loud thud echoed through the diner as Travis's chest slammed into the laminate surface. One down. The others hesitated, startled. Darius released Travis, letting him crumble to the floor, groaning. He turned to the remaining bikers, his eyes calm but firm. "You don't want this," he said softly, almost like advice. But bikers don't back down. Not when there's an audience. The wiry man with stringy hair was next. He charged with a yell, fists swinging wild. Darius sidestepped him like water flowing around a rock, then planted an elbow into the man's gut. The biker wheezed, folding over as Darius used his momentum to send him sprawling into a chair. 2 down. The remaining 3 bikers moved together. A sharp sense of panic rippled through the bikers as they suddenly realized this wasn't a street brawl, they had underestimated him. Their bravado faltered, replaced by an unmistakable fear. But it was already too late. The largest of them lunged toward Darius, grabbing at his shoulder, a miscalculation that would cost him dearly. In one fluid motion, Darius spun, trapping the man's arm and swiftly bringing him to the ground with a calculated sweep of his leg. The biker barely had time to register what had happened before Darius was kneeling over him, pressing a knee into his back, his voice low but clear, "Stay down." The man gasped for breath, unable to move, his body frozen in shock. 3 down, and the others were just beginning to realize their mistake. Before the next one could react, another biker charged at Darius from behind, brandishing a chair like a weapon. The attack was wild, chaotic, born from desperation. But Darius saw it coming, a duck, a swift rise, and then he wrenched the chair from the biker's hands. The man stumbled backward, off balance and defenseless. Darius closed the gap in an instant, delivering a precise shove that sent the biker crashing into a booth, where he crumpled in a heap. 4 down. The last of them hesitated. His eyes darted between his fallen comrades, each bruised and broken, their pride shattered. Then, he turned to face Darius. What he saw was a man who had effortlessly dismantled the others, his calm demeanor unbroken, his posture relaxed, like he'd just finished tying his shoe. It was too much. His hands trembled, his breath caught in his throat, and his gaze shifted toward the door. Without a word, he bolted, the bell above the door jingling as he fled into the parking lot. 5 down. And then, silence. The air in the diner was thick with tension, so still it almost seemed unreal. Darius exhaled, adjusted his baseball cap, and took in the chaos around him, the bikers groaning on the floor, too stunned to rise, Travis still slumped over the table, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. Darius met his gaze, his tone measured as he softly said, "I told you to back off." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the diner seemed to breathe with them. But what would be remembered wasn't the fight itself. It was what came after, the eerie quiet that filled the room. No one moved. The waitress, standing frozen behind the counter, still clutching the phone she never had the chance to use. The cook peered through the kitchen window, his spatula forgotten in his hand. And Darius? He stood there, the embodiment of control. His breathing was steady, his composure unshaken. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was simply someone who had just finished a meal. Travis pushed himself halfway upright, wincing as he did, his pride bruised more than his ribs. He looked up at Darius, his voice strained, "What the hell, who are you?" Darius glanced down at him, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer a smug grin, didn't gloat. Just a soft response, just a guy getting lunch. The words were simple, but they carried weight, and as they did, the room seemed to swell with a quiet respect. The eyes on Darius weren't filled with fear anymore, they were filled with awe, admiration. People weren't used to seeing someone so calm, so capable, in a world that often thrived on chaos. The wiry biker, still slumped in a chair, let out a breath and croaked, "You military or something?" Darius didn't answer. He turned away, walking back to his booth. His plate of burger and fries remained untouched, the coffee cup half full. He picked up a fry and took a bite, as though the last few minutes hadn't happened at all. The waitress, finally snapping out of her shock, stepped cautiously toward him, her voice trembling as she asked, "Sir, are you okay?" Darius looked up at her, his smile warm but soft. "I'm fine, ma'am." She blinked, caught off guard by the gentleness in his voice, so at odds with what had just transpired. She glanced at the bikers sprawled across the floor, then back at Darius, still unsure how to process it all. "I'll get you a fresh burger," she offered, her tone hesitant. But Darius, with a quiet shake of his head, replied, "No need. This one's just fine." A man sitting in the far booth, a grandfatherly figure with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, muttered to no one in particular, "I ain't never seen anything like that before." Darius didn't acknowledge the comment. He knew what they were thinking. A man who could stand so still in a world that was always moving, who could act with such precision, it was a rarity. And rarities stick in the memory. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and placed them neatly under the edge of his plate. Then, with the sound of his boots echoing in the otherwise silent room, he stood and made his way to the door. The waitress, still processing, called after him, "Wait! Who are you really?" Darius paused, his hand on the door, and turned just slightly, meeting her gaze for a beat longer than expected. His smile was faint, almost wistful. "Just a guy who knows how to finish his lunch," he said. And then, with a final glance, he stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling softly behind him. Outside, the gravel crunched under Darius's boots as he walked toward his truck. The biker who had fled earlier stood by his motorcycle, eyes wide, unable to speak. He simply stepped aside as Darius climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, breaking the stillness of the parking lot. Darius put the truck in gear, glancing once in the rearview mirror at the diner, at the faces still watching him through the windows. Then, without another word, he drove off, the road stretching out in front of him. The bikers would recover. Their bruises would fade. But the lesson they learned that day, about humility, respect, and strength, would stick with them far longer. You don't judge a man by his appearance, his words, or his past. Sometimes, the quietest ones are the ones you should never test. And for Darius, none of it mattered. He didn't care about the stories that would circulate. He didn't need recognition. He lived by a simple rule: treat others with respect, mind your business, and handle things with control when necessary. As he drove down the empty highway, the miles stretched out before him, and Darius was lost in his thoughts. He wasn't thinking about the diner, or the bikers, or the small town behind him. He thought of his time as a Navy SEAL, the missions no one would ever hear about, the people he protected without them ever knowing they needed it. That was what mattered to him, not the noise, not the ego, just the job. The faint hum of a tune on the old radio filled the truck, the kind of song that makes the road feel endless and free. A few miles later, Darius pulled into another small roadside stop, a gas station this time. He stepped out, stretched his legs, and grabbed a bottle of water from inside. The teenage cashier glanced up as Darius approached the counter, his headphones hanging loosely around his neck. "You headed somewhere important?" he asked casually. Darius smiled faintly, tossing a few bills onto the counter. "Nope, just passing through." The kid's eyes lingered on Darius for a moment, as if sensing something unspoken. "You military or something?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Darius paused, just for a fraction of a second, before shrugging nonchalantly. "Just a guy getting water." He stepped outside with the bottle in hand and climbed back into his truck. As he pulled back onto the road, the cashier watched him through the window, a feeling he couldn't quite name stirring inside him: respect, maybe, or curiosity. But Darius was already gone, off to another town, another stretch of road. He didn't need recognition. He didn't want it. But for everyone he left behind, his quiet strength spoke volumes, reminding them that you don't need to shout to be powerful, and that sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who let their actions do the talking. You don't earn respect by loud words or intimidation. You earn it by maintaining control, composure, and quiet strength. Never judge someone by what you think you see. The calmest people often have fought the hardest battles.